Hello and welcome to the Binge Thinker episode 31. My name is Jameel Raymond. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. This episode's a special one. I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive into something that I've been particularly interested in over the last few weeks, and that is the rise and the re-rise, rather, of Louis C.K. Let's just get straight into it. I don't really have any way to fluff about this, so let's go straight to the juice. Louis C.K. is back. If you don't know who Louis C.K. is, he was a popular comedian in the early 2010s, one of my favorite comedians when I really started to get into comedy. And he has made an interesting foray through cancel culture and through being cancelled, and now has made his way back, not into the mainstream per se, but there's certainly a redemption story here, and something that's really tickled my fancy as someone in the creator economy. So what I've found is his return has inadvertently created a model that has been replicated by other comedians and is a fantastic model of the future for other creatives that want to get into the solo creator journey, which is something that I'm doing right now by myself. But that's also the wave of the solopreneur, as it's being mentioned out here in the interwebs. Thanks to the delight of the internet, the ability of resources in abundance, and the digital tools that are available to all of us as individuals, there is way more opportunities to become an army of one and to create a business or a living or a lifestyle based on your individual inputs, as opposed to doing that through a corporation. I will talk a bit more about that in a later episode, my experiences of the corporation. And it's a really interesting way, and it's an interesting story about how this has fed my passion into starting my own stuff through ACN and podcasts and whatnot. But I've had a double shot coffee, I'm wired, and I've already started my first tangent of the show. So let's get straight into it. For the people who don't know who Louis C.K. is, let me give you the backstory. Louis C.K. is an American comedian of Hungarian and Mexican descent. He got it big in the early 2000s and 10s, in the late noughties. Feels very strange to say the noughties, by the way. It's hard to think that was also 20 years ago as well. Fucking hell, where's the time gone, eh? He was a comedian that got big in the early 2010s, has been a comedian since the late 90s, or through the 90s and the 80s as well. And what's so special about Louis is that he has a great everyman personality as a comedian. He goes through the struggle of being just a schlubby, moderate American man, the struggles of being a father and a husband, and still being that sort of not fully matured piece of shit mentality that a lot of comedians align with in the blue collar, right? As being this sort of man and individual you can sort of see part of your worst self in, and the mundane of everyday society being reflected back at you in his comedy. And he's also very, very sharp, great observations. Check him out on YouTube. And also check him out now on his website, which we'll talk about now. So Louis' rise came about through his specials making it onto the internet and the mainstream. That's how I found out about him anyway, probably about 2008, 2009. He had a special called Chewed Up, which was really, really good. Just some great punchy stand-up comedy. Just about, yeah, again, being the everyman, talking a lot about jerking off, which was very strange, which we'll come back to at a later date. But he had these specials that came out back to back. There was Chewed Up, hilarious, and then he created this series called Louis, which was like, it was a sitcom / comedy made on FX, came out about 2010, 2011. And this is where you really got to see Louis' talent shine, not just as a comedian, but as an actor, director, producer. All right? And these are some of the crumbs and the pieces that we'll talk about. So Louis had a background in film, loved creating films, and he was a young adult into his teens, grew up obsessed with videography, the art of film, and whatnot. And the series Louis, I think, is still fucking hilarious even today. I recommend you go check it out on his website. Just really insightful little shorts, some great non sequiturs in there. Just a really good, engaging piece of comedic art. But the other thing was interesting about Louis is that this is where he started to plant the seeds of self-production, self-direction. And that's what brought him to real fame, that differentiated him as a comedian as opposed to just being a regular stand-up, is that he understood the creative process, directed, acted, produced. And that produced part is very, very interesting to think about. So in 2011, Louis released his special Live at the Beacon Theatre. But what was very interesting about Live at the Beacon Theatre is that he sold it through his website only. So he went directly to the consumer from a website, produced it himself, shot it himself, and then had the full chain of supply from production to delivery, right? And this is really the first time I've heard of this style of self-production, self-management, and direct-to-consumer engagement, which is really the forefront now, thanks to the internet. That's quite commonplace nowadays, and some comedians are only catching up to this now. And this is what I find really, really interesting, is that he didn't need Hollywood, he didn't need the mainstream to produce his stuff. He actually just created his own company called Pig Newton, I believe. And with Pig Newton, created the special, edited himself, had all the direction, put it out, direct to consumer. And therefore, just like we've talked about in this podcast many times before, he got to claim every dollar from beginning to end. And from my notes here, Live at the Beacon got Louis $1 million in the first 11 days of its release. So he was really climbing onto that wave of who he was as a creative individual, capitalizing on his growing brand thanks to his specials and the work that he's done over the last, 20 plus years really, but becoming a digital star and then capitalizing on it through creating his own product end to end. And that's a great example very early on of what the platform economy can do, what the attention and the digital economy can do for individuals who want to create and produce their own things. In that time, Louis also released 2 more specials for $5 each. And then his next special, Oh My God, was actually released and distributed using the same method, right? So we know straight away that he knows this works, and he gets to own every piece. He gets to have creative and personal freedom by creating his own stuff end to end. Now, this is virtually unheard of back in the day because it was very difficult for comedians to even produce their own stuff. They weren't looking at things like creating their own website or understanding how hosting works, right? This is the mind of a tinkerer. This is a guy that wanted to figure it out, put all the components together himself, and created his own essential funnel all the way to the production, from attention to production to output to benefit. And we're only seeing that come into fruition now through a digital product in the mainstream over the last 2 or 3 years. Because if you think about what the internet was 10, 11 years ago, it was very hard to get high quality videos and have anyone source large scale files that wasn't a torrent, right? Remember the good old days of torrenting? It's funny how torrenting's disappeared now, hasn't it? It just goes to show that convenience wins out every single time when it comes to torrenting. Because when you get in the way of what people want, people will find a way through it. But if you just put something as simple as a fucking paywall in front of the product, and you just go, hey, it's right behind this, pay for it, people will do it. And that's why everyone's got Netflix and is happy to pay 15 or 16 bucks per streaming platform, because they get the thing that they want now. Never forget the unyielding power of convenience. Why? Because as energetic beings, we are naturally aligned to consuming as little energy as possible in our process. Making sure that we are getting the maximum output for the minimum energy input. We are driving efficiencies. It's one of the most basic laws of the universe. I'm going to do an episode on thermodynamics. I'm definitely not a scientist, right? I am an idiot, or somewhat less of an idiot. But understanding, or I've come to understand at the very least, that understanding the basic laws of thermodynamics actually drives a significant amount of behavior in human psychology, which I find really interesting, and we will come back to that at a later ep. So Louis creates this model, and it's successful. People take notice. People like Joe Rogan release their own special directly on their website. Aziz Ansari, Jim Gaffigan, right? All great American comedians who notice, hey, this model works. Why wouldn't I just get this out to the people? And it's a useful model, and it's sort of funny how it only sort of like had a bit of a blip in the radar and then disappeared, right? But, so Louis was growing from there, from about 2012 onwards, getting bigger and bigger, doing more and more seasons of Louis. He was in movies, he was doing bit parts in other TV shows and movies. And then, in 2017, Louis got cancelled. Why? He had multiple accusations of sexual misconduct. I had a big article written about him in the New York Times about, I think it was five incidents with women with inappropriate sexual conduct over the years, not even in recent times, but spanning back a little bit, right? Most of the cases seem to be him having a penchant for jerking off in front of women with consent, maybe, probably not, but certainly at an inappropriate level worthy of them keeping that in their memory as, hey, that wasn't cool. But yeah, nothing major, thankfully, that we know of. Just seems to like jerking it in front of ladies. With their consent, maybe. Who knows? I don't. So yeah, Louis gets cancelled, right? He gets pulled from major networks. All of his existing deals are gone. He says goodbye to FX. He has a movie called I Love You Daddy that gets canned because he knew that the article was coming out. And so he's gone, right? In the 2018, 2017 seemed to be, was it the Me Too movement? Probably around that, but there was certainly the breadth of cancel culture was found amongst Hollywood. And he felt like one of the first major casualties in my eyes. Not that I was paying much attention, but to me, I go, Louis got fucking cancelled. With that, I mean, fair enough, right? The accusations are bad. He did some terrible things. He admitted to them, regretted it, disappeared for a while, right? Not to say that cancel culture is bad in that way, that it shines a light on the struggles of women in Hollywood or the abuse of men's power in entertainment or any industry really, but this is definitely focused on entertainment. And that cancellation was big, right, for an individual. According to his own notes, Louis lost $35 million worth of potential income in 2018 from all the cancellations alone. So from there, Louis goes off into the cancel culture wilderness, right? He disappears for a while. I think he's based in New York, still got a family to look after, has to keep his head down for a bit, understandably so. He apparently had a French girlfriend, lived in France for a bit, you know, just stayed away from the limelight. But, you know, as a comedian, you still have a livelihood to maintain here, right? So in about early 2019, 2020, he started touring quietly, anonymously, not trying to, you know, cause a fuzz or anything like that. And, you know, he starts to rebuild. He starts to rebuild his act, what he's doing. Even as so much by early 2020, he's back touring with some decent names. Dave Chappelle, he's doing gigs around New York. He starts launching an international tour that takes him around the world, and he's still doing well and selling out. In April 2020, he actually releases a special called Sincerely Louis C.K., and which he releases again directly from his website to his fans, engaging them via mailing list. And that mailing list is also very important, which we will get to later again, the solution of what's going on. So he gets to that point. By 2021, he's touring, he's got his special out. By early 2022, the current day, essentially, he's making headlines or he's making moves, rather, not headlines, but he's making moves onto all the major podcasters. He's on Rogan, he's on YMH. He's making himself known to the public again after the purgatory of being cancelled. And it's not just like he's sort of begrudgingly sort of sneaking his way back in. He's got a body of work to promote. So he's got the special. He just this year released a movie called 4th of July, which features a bunch of New York comics. And now he's even released a special with Robert Kelly, another great American comedian, called Killbox. So the perpetual machine of who he is still going. And if anything, he's just as critical as a success as he was, you know, in 2012 and 2013 during his peak. Because just this year, he wins a Grammy for Sincerely Louis C.K., the special that he released in April 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, when he should still be in the cancellation purgatory. And the underlying pattern here, which is what's really interesting, right, is that he's had to become self-reliant, or had the underlying infrastructure of self-reliance by being a creative, a producer, a director, an editor, and then somewhat of a marketer, to get a product that is able to make him garner a living through what he does, independent of the mainstream. But he's done this in a period of time when the mainstream still had quite a hold over what gets made and what doesn't get made for the broad global markets that exist. And that's what's interesting now, is that through this cavalcade of emotion and, you know, this up and down story, this trajectory of his last 5-ish years, maybe a bit more, he has inadvertently created the successful model of the independent creative now. And that's something that's been replicated by plenty of other comedians now. Andrew Schultz, Shane Gillis, all of these comedians that are deemed too heavy or too spicy or too, controversial for the mainstream audience. Because also, in reality, the mainstream doesn't really exist anymore. In that time, in that decade plus, it's not really beneficial or really an aim for most comedians to now get onto mainstream TV. So this really, in my eyes, and this is why I'm so engaged and enthralled about it, is that 10 years ago, over a decade ago, maybe even longer, Louis has created this template of individual and creative freedom that should be replicated by any individual that wants the same thing, that wants to be creatively and individually free in what they do. And because of that, right, now he is uncancellable again, right? But does it even exist now in today's society? And here's why I think he's uncancellable. So why he's uncancellable is because now Louis has his own ecosystem of followers, right? He's accumulated a significant mailing list of individuals through his name, through his website, through his mailing lists, and kept them engaged over a period of time. People have opted in, into his world, into being interested in what he is up to. And certainly because of his massive brand in the early 2010s, 2020s, or, actually early 2010s, those lists, that database exists. That data still is there for him to utilize to get his message out. And it's obviously gotten him to a point where he can create feature films and create well-produced specials and use the funding from the pipeline that's generated through his mailing list to subsist, really. I mean, sure, he has to go on all these major podcasts to promote and see if he can get additional eyes on there. But I seriously suspect that his own mailing list and his name relative to the individuals that aren't as punitive as those that called for his cancellation and who had basically enabled it 5-ish years ago, they go, yeah, he did some bad shit, but we moved on. And he said sorry, and let's just move on with life, and he's still creating cool stuff that I'm interested in, so I'm going to buy it. And fair enough, right? And I'm not backing in what he did here, right? Don't get me wrong. What Louis did was wrong, right? I remember when I found out about the allegations, I was pretty grossed out, and I was really disappointed in Louis. Because it's just not a nice thing to hear about. You know that everyone has their desires and their needs and their wants, and, you know, we shouldn't necessarily be shaming people for their sexual desire. But obviously the question of consent is heavily at the forefront here. And if they don't consent, then absolutely he's done something wrong. But I remember there was something that really irritated me about those allegations with Louis, is that he kind of hid in plain sight about what he did. And this could just be me, you know, extrapolating or BSing here. But there was certainly a lot of references to jerking off in his material, in his stand-up. He used to make a lot of jerking off jokes. It used to be a bit of a through line on a bit of his stand-up. And then even in that movie that got cancelled, or basically got scrapped, called I Love You, Daddy, the plot line of that was about the character that was played by Louis fending off weird sexual allegations around just before the time the allegations of the sexual assaults had come out. So to me, and you know, just an observation here, it kind of feels like the criminal that's hiding in plain sight, or the guy, you know, the serial killer that wants to get caught. That's the kind of vibe I got from it. Right or wrong, it irked me. So I definitely was off Louis for a bit. And I was like, good riddance. Not really cool what he's done. You know, hopefully he sees the error of his ways, which he did, right? But now him coming back, you know, and I'm listening to these podcasts or watching these pods and watching him interview people, you forget. You forget how much of an insightful individual he is into the art of comedy, into film, and just in life in general, because you can't have this level of observation and create this level of quality art, let's say that, without having an astute view of reality and being able to communicate that in a useful and engaging way. That's what most creatives are struggling to do at any one time, is this creative process of articulating how they see and feel about the world. So now I'm happy for him, right? I'm happy that he's back. I've come to reappreciate his individual artistry and creative artistry. And you need to remember that, yeah, he's just a human that makes mistakes. But here's the thing that sort of swims in my mind is the two main things is that the concept of mainstream success nowadays and the questions around cancel culture, right? Should he have got cancelled and been taken away from positions of power for a bit? Yeah, sure. But who keeps him in that purgatory? Who keeps him in the cancel bin? Because sure, you want to punish him and, you know, the people on the left will celebrate that and go, woo, one for the team. And again, absolutely they should have, right? But who's keeping an eye on the prisoners? Who defines that? And also, is it just the fact that people that are moderate and right-leaning, although I don't want to bring the right into this, but definitely the moderates who go, okay, he did some bad shit, but he's still pretty funny and he's still got some cool stuff going. He served his time, right? I mean, when we think about people going to jail, jail is supposed to be a rehabilitative process, right? The idea is that you put people away into the sin bin, they think about what they've done, you get them away from situations or any stimulations that might trigger crimes to repunish or that sort of stuff over and over again. And then they're back in rehabilitated, functional members of society, right? And it's not to say that Louis wasn't ever not a functional member of society, although that could be argued since he is a comedian, right? And we're all fucking damaged. But I think the question is, all right, has the people, or have enough people accepted him for being back in the fold again? I think the answer is yes. Because really the people that would be keeping an eye on him to make sure he stays in this cancel bin don't really care anymore. And again, cancel culture, I think, is waning off. I've been saying this constantly and will continue to say this. The pendulum is swinging back. The collective fear of being cancelled or being remonstrated for a comment or an outcome or an action. Yes, they are bad actions though. The cumulative fear that people sat in for just making mistakes, and the fear of this almost corporal punishment societally when it came to being cancelled, particularly if you're high in the power ranks, people get frustrated with that because there is supposed to be this air of forgiveness and understanding and empathy that seems to be forgotten in the fervor of wanting to punish someone for not meeting an ideal. And again, I think that's what brings the counterculture back. And we just get frustrated because we feel that unease in anything that we're trying to push as a social agenda on any side of the fence. Is that, is this really aligned to how I feel? Or is this really, really right? And then you just sort of go along with it because you haven't really thought about it enough to have an articulate point, nor do you really care. You just keep your head down, right? That's what so many people do. And that's the unfortunate repercussions of identity politics that we've got here today. Is at the center, it's just like, man, you guys are both kind of fucked. I'm just going to sit here and just vibe this out and sort of hopefully it doesn't get to me. And then you go, hey, Louis is still funny. So I'm going to buy his stuff, or I'm going to be engaged in what he does. The second thing is, you don't need the mainstream to make a substantial living as a creative anymore, right? I've said this time and time on this podcast, right? The beauty of the internet, the beauty of things like YouTube and consumer engagement and being able to connect with people, to build multifunctional teams, to go from concept to production to digital infrastructure, deliver the goods to the end consumer, can be spun up pretty quickly nowadays. Even to the point now you can stitch together different applications to create your entire architecture funnel when it comes from creation down to marketing deployment. You know, for example, something as simple as Adobe Premiere Pro for editing, YouTube for platform and scale and social media. Then you could host it on something like Amazon Web Services or Azure or some sort of website. Those website hosts usually have some sort of sales funnel that is activated by another platform called like Shopify. And then bang, you put PayPal at the end of that. That's 5 or 6 applications that could give you a full stack engagement from production to delivery of your digital product. You've just got to be able to harness attention in the attention economy, which is what we all live in nowadays, to get your product out there. You don't have to worry about execs. You don't have to worry about non-creative executives getting in the way of your vision, of your ideas, to get them to the people that it resonates with. And that's what we're seeing now today with this new wave of independent creatives, particularly comedians, whose ideas and concepts are usually too risky by those that are just focused on the dollar, which is the executive, the production company, who look at this as an ROI perspective as opposed to the expression of individuality in art. And that's what I find really interesting about Louis now, is that he has created that model. People have obviously, other people have ceded to it, and it's working. Andrew Schultz made 3 or 4 times back on his money, back on his investment for his special. And he was making great money beforehand, so he must be extra rich now. So the model is there. The big requirement is you need to be able to have a product that you can own and deliver and have the reach to generate the pipeline to get it to a marketable and profitable amount of people so you can create a living. So you've got to be a great producer and a great marketer. And those are the 2 most essential skills in the digital world today. Just like the communists said, one must seize the means of production to be a successful something. It's not a, what's the collective of communists? Poor. But in summary, Louis, the godfather of independent creativity in the digital ecosystem. If you're a creative or a creator, definitely worth keeping an eye on. Glad to get that out of my brain. It's been seething for weeks into your brains as well. Think about it, let it digest. Maybe you'll plant some seeds of your own. This could apply to music, this could apply to any type of film, any creative art, any creative output that you've got. Maybe not physical art, digital art maybe, you know, NFTs, everyone talks about that. That really is essentially scaling out a visual medium through a token system. It could also work. But think about it. I know I have. So in other news, in my life, I have torn my bicep. I tore my bicep tendon, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago. I have a 3.5 centimeter by 1 centimeter tear in my right bicep. Not in the bicep itself, the tendon in the elbow, which has been fucking great. Has put a bit of a dent into, you know, hot boy summer. I cannot train for the next 3 to 4 weeks. My upper body, I've got to let things rest. And why I wanted to bring this up is there's a couple of things inside my mind that I thought was worth sharing and sort of just observing, right? Is that, first of all, when I damaged my bicep, I didn't even actually feel much pain. It felt like something popped for sure, but there wasn't actually that much pain, but it definitely was not good. And I felt that, and even though I felt that pop and I was like, what the fuck is going on? Grossly enough, I went for another set afterwards, which probably did not help either. I probably made it fucking worse. But I didn't actually get any help on it until a few days later. And in that interim period, so I hurt myself on the Friday. I think I got it checked out on the Monday or Tuesday because there was a lot of bruising. And why there was a lot of bruising inside my arm is that the muscle and the tendon had torn and was bleeding from the inside of my arm. And the blood is just pooling in my arm, which is kind of gross when you think about it, right? But I was trying to sleep one night and I was thinking about what the repercussions of this injury could be. Because this is actually my first ever major injury. I've never broken a bone. I've sprained my ankle a few times, but nothing too major. I've never torn a muscle or anything like that. So this is the first serious issue that I've had. And then, as our night thoughts often consume us, sometimes it's good, mostly it's bad. I felt when I was thinking about the idea of tearing this muscle and causing long-term damage and without having an answer, I felt the scared little boy inside me. It took over for a second. It was the scared, hurt inner child that fell off his bike or, has fallen over and has hurt himself and just, was on the verge of tears and being afraid and, he's feeling the pain. And that was a sensation and a recognition of that self that took over me for a little while. And I definitely got caught up in it, right? Definitely felt like that child inside, even though I was a 32-year-old man. It was like, oh no, what do I do? I could really use some comfort. I could really use some reassurance from someone that everything's going to be okay. And it's just important to recognize that within yourself, is to understand those different layers of who you are. Your inner child never goes away. If anything, you need to nurture that hurt little inner child to become a healthier individual adult, because the same brain that has grown in your childhood means that the coding in there, it feeds through into your adult brain as well. And most of what therapies and trauma repair and association is with is a hurt, lost inner child that needs to be soothed, tended for, looked after. So I thought it was really important to address it and, meta-communicate, as we talk about in this pod, making sure that you are the observant individual and the observer of your thoughts and emotions, not being consumed by them. To make sure that I took the time for the older, more mature me to acknowledge the hurt boy and soothe him and go, hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. Yes, you might be hurt, but we'll get through this and it's going to be all right. I had to soothe that dimension of myself, that younger dimension of myself, to make sure that I had a more integrated sense of being inside of myself. And I think it's something that hasn't really happened too much, so prevalently in my thoughts, is that yes, I'm always thinking back and trying to reconnect with that inner child when it comes to play or to trauma, but to be actively engaged in that process with the child and being caught up in the child in a present moment, I think that's really important and really interesting to be aware of as well. Thought it was just worth sharing, because I want, hopefully, why don't you think of some areas in your life where you've probably felt that child come up? I feel like it's definitely happened to other people. I am not a singular, or I'm not alone in this process. I am a single individual in the collective consciousness. I'm sure that there have been moments in everyone's life where that child is there, maybe often more than not, because there are a lot of people that haven't reached a lot of emotional maturity in some ways, because the pain of what happened when they were younger keeps them in that emotional lock and that emotional age for quite some time. The world is full of hurt children. There is actually very few genuine adults in society. There is a lot of hurt children, and we get sent back into these perpetual states of childlike suffering and immaturity when these wounds are triggered inside ourselves. So I just thought it was worth sharing and sort of communicating. And it might be worth, binges, understanding, has this happened to me in my life? What could I do to address that hurt inner child in situations of physical stress and suffering, or just in any areas of suffering that you have in your life? Just, a binge thought, as we so often have on this podcast. That's what it's for, right? But it's not, the other interesting thing is it's just not the hurt inner child that was present in this experience. There's definitely the insecure teen, tween, young adult, even adult now, that's been a constant in this process that I've had to deal with. And what I mean by that is I was really fighting the idea that I could not train my upper body for 4 weeks. Is that I should not be training anything from the waist up to make sure that this tendon and this muscle gets adequate rest and healing, so I don't fuck it up in the future. But I was fighting professional and medical advice from multiple sources to be like, come on, can't I just train a little chest or something, or do some delts or something? And why I've realized I kept fighting it is that there is still a significant part of me that puts a lot of value of my own self-value and self-esteem on my physical look, and the fact that I've got a physically attractive body and one that I am comfortable with, or increasingly comfortable with. That I still put a lot of self-esteem into the way I look. And that is the insecure little fatty I probably shouldn't call him that either. The insecure young man that put so much value into being fit, physically fit, because he was bullied and ostracized so much for being overweight and lazy. And yeah, definitely that insecure, hurt little child is there. A little bit older than the almost toddlerish sort of one that was really scared about the bicep. But again, it's really interesting to see the different levels of emotional maturity come up in my psyche throughout stressful or triggering periods. It's been very interesting to have that come through my brain. And I think it's worth sharing with the good listeners and watchers of this podcast, because I think it's worth everyone observing within their own minds. Think about some times in your life, maybe you're going through them right now, where you're not necessarily thinking rationally, you're coming from that hurt, insecure individual. And what age is that? What fragment of you over time is being resurfacing, being brought back to your present mind? Just a really interesting thought to think about is, where are you in your emotional maturity at different phases of struggle, different confrontational moments in your life? Something worth thinking about. To wrap up the podcast now, I wanted to share some great news with you. A couple of months ago now, I had this binge thought that I shared with the good people about a chili app. An app which would tell you how spicy something actually is relative to a set spice scale that people can understand. Hopefully you guys remember that. It's stuck in my brain. The good people at Uber Eats have used this idea in some small capacity. The other day, I will check it up on the YouTube. The other day, I was on Uber Eats being a lazy shit as usual when it came to my dinner. And it comes up with different levels of spice on different types of food. And I was like, God damn it, yes! I knew I was up to something. I knew it. Because it's such a common problem. How spicy is something? And what do you mean by that? Is it white people spicy? Is it black people spicy? Is it Asian people spicy? I don't know. We can't tell. Let's standardize it just like we do everything else and give the people some peace of mind and peace of bowel. But I'm glad that someone somewhere, even if it is a shitty big corporations whose services and quality of service has fallen dramatically over the last 12 to 18 months, has taken advantage of it. I live only for the benefit of the people. Hopefully you get something out of it. Hey, if you have encountered what level 1 spice is on the Uber Eats app, tell me. I would love to know what level 1 spice is to the people of Uber Eats. I reckon it's white people spicy, which would be like, I don't know, mint toothpaste. I don't fucking know. But it would be great to see where their scale is as well. Maybe I should speak to a product manager at Uber Eats and figure it out. Anyway, just thought that was hilarious. Wanted to share it with you guys. Folks, that's the podcast for this week. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, show your love, show your support by subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend or a family member. Aussie Comedy Network. I don't have to plug that anymore, but I still do anyway out of default. I'm wearing the t-shirt because I still love the brand. Anyway, I'll see you next week, folks. Keep binging. I love yous all, and goodbye.